First of all, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. London's my hometown, so this one is really special. Thank you. When I read the Picker report commissioned by the CQC looking at how children felt about their inpatient hospital stays, it came as no surprise whatsoever to learn that certain groups of children, those with physical disabilities, intellectual impairments and mental health issues, appeared to have a significantly less favourable experience. Between them, my now young adult children, I should say, fall into all of those three categories. My middle child, Toby, is the most compromised of the three of them, and what makes it harder is that his syndrome is unique. He seems to be the only person on the planet with whatever his mystery condition actually is. There aren't any experts in his field doing cutting-edge research into his condition. There are no support groups that could give us a glimpse into his future. There aren't any specialist consultants who've devoted their whole careers into easing his particular condition that I might otherwise be able to contact when I got stuck. By default, I am Toby's only expert. He spent most of his first 6 years in hospital with me beside him as a resident parent. He was never expected to survive past early childhood. And on 38 separate occasions in those 6 years, it was suggested that I should bring the extended family and bring them to his bedside while we waited together to say a final goodbye. Every single time he rallied, each time he came back to us. And earlier this year, we had the biggest, best, loudest, most fun 21st birthday party ever. A party that we never ever thought he'd make. But yes, Toby's still with us, amazingly. However, he is still profoundly disabled and he needs medical care around the clock. Hospitals and healthcare have always been a huge part of our family landscape. And for most of his childhood, he was under 14 different consultants. Now, if you factor in all the tests, therapy and investigation appointments as well, it felt like I'd won the jackpot if we weren't in outpatients at least 3 times in any single week. When he was at home, the battle to keep him alive just didn't stop. Nebulizers, chest physio, oxygen nasal cannulas, tube feeding, oxygen saturation monitors. He had 2 main hobbies. The first one was worrying his mother, and the second one was to stop breathing and go blue. CPR in our house was a normal part of family life. We've also got a lot of neurological disabilities in my house, all the invisible conditions that can make life just that little bit more difficult. But they're a walk in the park compared to Toby, who at 21 is non-verbal, doubly incontinent, dysphagic with severe autism and the cognitive equivalent to a neurotypical 2-year-old. But it hasn't always been like that, though. My youngest son, Adam, when he was 13, the first I knew that he was in the depths of serious depression was one morning when I tried to wake him for school, and he was distraught because he was still alive. The previous night, he'd tried to kill himself by taping a plastic bag over his head. That started a 3-year period of me being on constant suicide watch, getting up several times a night, not just to turn Toby over in bed every 2 hours and to monitor his breathing as I'd always done, but now I had to set the alarm every hour just to make sure Adam was safe. Over those 3 years, I lost count of how many near misses we had with him on a death wish, just wanting to die. He's 18 now and he's in a very different place. But as his mum, the fear never ever goes away that one day I might accidentally miss something. Now the thing is, I love the NHS, of course I do. Without it, my children might not have made it. But it hasn't been fabulous by any means all the way through. There are countless people working in hospitals who are simply wonderful and who do really make a difference. But they're often the ones who are swimming against the tide. And sometimes the whole NHS machinery doesn't always support them in doing their jobs properly, with care and kindness, and with the time to listen. But they are the people who will always get the absolute best from Toby. They're the ones who'll see his hilarious sense of humour, and they'll catch the twinkle of mischief in his eyes. They'll be the ones he'll still be blowing kisses to when we get to the end of the corridor. But we don't always meet those lovely people. And sometimes even when we do, somebody else can come along and accidentally undo all their hard work. The sad thing is, whenever Toby gets to hospital, there is always going to be a disconnect. Toby is loud, he's boisterous, he's noisy, he's got no inhibitions, and he's got an attention span that lasts a few seconds. Like many learning disabled children and young people, he is not cooperative by nature. And if he gets cross or anxious, frightened or bored, his behaviour will become extremely challenging. Once he crosses that line into meltdown, it can take several hours to calm him down. On the other hand, hospitals are calm, controlled environments staffed with highly trained, very professional and self-disciplined people, where time is of paramount importance. Absolutely everything that Toby isn't, in fact. So every time we go to hospital, there's going to be a culture clash. While we're there, I can't leave him for a second, even to dash to the loo. Generally, staff and patients also try to keep their distance. But the stares we get and the sense of disapproval is tangible. We both feel judged. We both feel we aren't good enough and that we need to try harder. Toby has a learning disability, but he doesn't have an emotional disability. He can pick up the look on someone's face or the impatient tone in their voice. But this is Toby, this is how he is. He can't change. No amount of looking at me as if I can magically somehow make him conform to hospital standards of behaviour is going to make a blind bit of difference. Many times I've got in the car afterwards and I can't drive until I've stopped crying. If Toby can't change, then we're going to have to help the hospitals and the people that work in them to change. It's not just me and our family. I run a Facebook page which supports 4,500 other parents. Last week, I told them I was coming here and I asked them, is there anything you'd like me to tell these people? Scores of them responded with sad, horrific and heartbreaking stories, and I'll just read through some of the most common themes. Waiting times. A child who spends so much in outpatients, why can't they be fast-tracked? Now, I understand this one thoroughly. Some weeks, Toby and I have spent over 10 hours in the same waiting room across 4 appointments, and that isn't any way to spend a childhood. Getting a diagnosis and being believed, this is huge for lots of people, particularly when there's a neurodevelopmental disorder such as autism. Every year that a child isn't diagnosed is a year when they're losing more potential. I was at another conference a couple of weeks ago where I was told that 80% of young offenders are undiagnosed with conditions such as autism or other neurological conditions. We have to diagnose people if there's something wrong. Children being left in pain. The number of parents of non-verbal, profoundly disabled children who've been in touch to tell me about how much they just know that their child is in constant and extreme pain, but that their medical team won't agree. I had one mother of a 7-year-old little PMLD girl who's got severe cerebral palsy, and this little girl will scream and writhe in pain for several hours at a time as her body goes into what her mum describes as spasms. Her mum has tried everything she knows how to get the doctors to listen. She's tried to get regular pain relief prescribed, but she can't make anybody believe her. She's now treated as a difficult parent, and her consultant paediatrician has told the mum to just ignore these episodes because her daughter is probably just being attention-seeking. I spoke to a friend of mine earlier in the week whose daughter is a vet. I was told that vets always believe their owners if they're in pain. Why not parents and their children? Anyway, another one is autism and learning disability. Parents are really frustrated at how in hospitals nobody seems to understand either condition. In fact, one parent told me that a consultant called her child a naughty brat. This child was a frightened 5-year-old autistic child who just had cardiac surgery. Parent blaming, that happens more than you'd ever realise. So many of us feel judged. And certainly when there are behaviour issues linked to a developmental disability, it's very easy for us to be labelled as having poor parenting skills. Then there's the issue of who a doctor should talk to and how things should be communicated. I mean, it's fabulous that the medical professional are being encouraged to consult directly with children. The children's voice, yes, is very important, but it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, and nor can it ever be instead of consulting with parents. And some of our children simply don't have the capacity to hold a conversation, and some may be extremely stressed out and thrown by it. Parents know their children, we know what they can deal with and what they can't, yet sometimes by asking a member of the staff to talk to us instead of to our children, it can feel that negative assumptions about us, perhaps being controlling, might be being made. The sad thing is, though, that just because a teenager might look like a big man, it doesn't always mean that he is. Medical professionals have the experience and knowledge about our children's health. Parents have the experience and knowledge of who our children are. If we could only pull together in true partnership and trust, what a fabulous team we'd be. But unfortunately, many professionals only seem to understand how to do partnership working if the parents are completely on side and nodding in agreement. And when we're not, we get labelled difficult sometimes. When we're impatient with our children, it can be even harder. The isolation, the exhaustion and the aloneness of being a resident parent of a complex needs child is relentless. Often it's the case that the ward staff will realise that we know what we're doing, so they'll leave us to it and we get on with everything day and night. No breaks, no regular meals and no support. Sometimes feels as if they're frightened by how different our children are, and they find it easier to be completely hands-off. Now that means that even nipping over to the canteen becomes impossible, so we go hungry. And it can also mean that we just don't sleep if our child is in pain or having seizures all night long. Once, when Toby was an inpatient, I had to nip off to another department to have a biopsy. While I was gone, staff couldn't manage him and called security. Luckily, I got back in time, but it did make me understand how a mum feels who wrote to me. Her autistic, learning disabled, 16-year-old son was detained under the Mental Health Act on an adult ward and against her will. For nearly 5 months, she watched helpless and unable to protect him as care assistants regularly manhandled him to the ground whenever his anxiety tipped over into a meltdown. They broke his nose, but they didn't notice. It was only picked up after he went home. The NHS was designed for people. Every single person who chooses to become a nurse or a doctor or to join any other healthcare profession does so because they want to help people. Yet we've lost our way. The NHS isn't about people anymore. It's about policies, procedures, pathways, protocols, targets, efficiencies. Staff aren't praised on the quality of care, or how kind they were to a particular patient, or how well they listened to somebody. Kindness has become an add-on, the extra bit that might be nice on top of everything else, but not a priority. Instead, bureaucracy has taken over. Kindness has to be key. It has to be the starting point of all healthcare. If kindness is at the core of everything, people will be listened to. Great healthcare decisions will be taken. People will get better quicker, and the true meaning of efficiency will be rediscovered. If we could just turn it upside down and look after kindness, all the other tick boxes will get organically filled. It will just happen. Thing is, kindness doesn't cost a penny, but it's priceless, and bad care without kindness costs far more. Things go wrong, costs spiral out of control, while people are left to suffer in pain and feeling uncared for. But when I talk about kindness, it can't just be for the patients. It has to start in every hospital department. It has to be extended first towards staff, and then they have to extend it towards their colleagues. It's a group mentality thing, a team dynamic approach. Right now, staff feel undervalued. More and more is expected of them. They feel like they're running on a hamster wheel and expected to go ever faster. They feel they're running on empty and that they've got nothing left to give. They need kindness. They need to be valued and praised, often for doing a good job. When did you last hear anyone in the NHS Say well done to a colleague for being kind to someone, or for listening so intently that they made a bewildered patient feel special and cared for. Does it ever happen? The opposite, I know, does happen. I've spoken to doctors who've been criticised for taking too long in clinic appointments because they're trying to give their patients the time and care that they feel they deserve. Sometimes things go wrong, horribly wrong for children in hospital. I know several parents who have children who've died needlessly or who have had medical accidents that shouldn't have happened. Something went hideously wrong for Toby once when he was a baby in intensive care, and he has a huge and unnecessary disfiguring scar because of what happened. Tellingly, in virtually every single one of these cases, the parent has been there, realising things are falling apart, knowing something is wrong, and trying to tell staff, sometimes for hours or days before, but they haven't been listened to, they haven't been heard, or they've been dismissed as being overprotective or difficult. The thing is, afterwards, if you say to a doctor, "But doctor, I told you so," that doesn't bring a child back, and it will never undo the scar on Toby's foot. As well as kindness, staff need basic training in learning disability and autism, because unless they understand the basics, of course they're going to be frightened, and there's going to be a sense of the uncomfortable in not knowing how to communicate and how to interact with someone who behaves in a way that isn't conventional. Toby can't change. Toby is who he is, but you can change. In the end, this isn't about the NHS. It's about every single individual within it. Change can begin right now, and it can begin with you. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with bilateral breast cancer, and a year later they discovered that all the difficult treatment I'd had hadn't worked and that it had spread to my spine. Then my prognosis was an average life expectancy of 26 months. 31 months later, I'm still having treatment to prolong my life, which is going very well. But when that news came, not one of my family or friends was the least bit surprised that I had a terminal illness. They all knew how much stress my overloaded lifestyle had caused, and it felt like this was an accident that was waiting to happen. I'd literally worn myself out. The day I was given my difficult prognosis, I made myself a promise. In whatever time I have left, I would do all I possibly could to make things better for the next generation of families like my own. If I can just prevent one other parent from getting a devastating diagnosis, it would have been worthwhile. I wrote this book last year, The Special Parents Handbook, and I was thrilled when it became an Amazon #1 bestseller. It's the book I wish I'd been given the day Toby was born, filled with everything I learnt along the way to help other parents cope better earlier than I was able to do. However, then healthcare professionals started reading it too, and then I was named by the HSJ as being one of the top 50 inspirational women in healthcare last year. The thing is, I want to do anything I can to help make things better, and that's why I'm talking at conferences. That's why I now run workshops, not just for parents, but also for healthcare professionals on autism and learning disability and anything like that. Why I'm supporting parents online and why I'm writing all the time about these sorts of issues. Toby doesn't live at home anymore. That was the toughest decision that I had to make last year. But the bottom line is, the fact is, I'm not well enough to do his round-the-clock care anymore. He's in a fabulous care home a few roads away, and we see him several times a week. However, it has left me with a lot of time on my hands. I'd much rather be doing something like this indirectly to help Toby by working with the NHS to try and make a difference, than to be sitting around taking up knitting and waiting for the Grim Reaper to come calling. I have a vision of the sort of healthcare I'd like to see as standard. It's based on a wonderful doctor I knew a very long time ago. And this is what I wish for, that every single hospital employee could learn how to truly listen. Some health professionals barely listen at all. Others appear to listen, but you soon realise that it was only so they could formulate their reply. Occasionally we meet someone very special who really listens, completely tuned in, so they even hear what's left unsaid. They are the ones who make magic happen. As well as absorbing our words, they gain a real sense of what our lives are really like, in a way that parents like me seldom experience. Time stopped still while compassionate kindness soothed suffering. And in that moment, something profound happens. My sick child becomes the only thing that matters. You hear and you take my concern seriously, somehow knowing that this is my first adult conversation in days. You make me feel like an equal rather than someone less. You absorb all I say, even though I'm barely making sense. You help me make sense of all my fears. You see who the essence of my broken, hurting little boy really is. You barely notice his disabilities and all his equipment. You make a holistic assessment based on the quality of his life rather than individual symptoms. When my child won't cooperate with your examination, you ask for and you accept my help. I suggest we turn it into a game and you play along enthusiastically. You offer me a glimpse of the future when all doctors are like this, when we all pull together on the same side, working in partnership solely to enhance our children's lives. I can tell by your eyes that you know the things we haven't talked about. You can see my exhaustion and you notice my hair hasn't seen the comb recently, but you don't judge me and you don't make me feel inadequate. You just get how my life is. A never-ending merry-go-round of sleep deprivation, coping with double incontinence, of tube feeds, standing frames, of nasal cannulas, of oxygen saturation monitors, and of the ever-present vomiting and chest physiotherapy in the middle of the night. You know how his fragility terrifies me, knowing that his tenuous grip on life could snap at any moment. You feel my guilt that I can't stop his pain, and you sense how hard I work to keep him alive. But you also know better than to ask me how I really am, because you know I'll always say, oh, I'm fine. You understand that that's better than me starting to cry and never being able to stop, so we just don't go there. We don't have to go there, because for that moment, you already were there with me, and for my child. Thank you.